of this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to just...
In support of this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to just step back for a moment. The debate has gotten well afield of what this underlying legislation, which Chairman Garrett and I worked on, was all about. So I want to take a step back before I talk about my amendment and just say this. One, nobody disputes that derivatives weren't an absolutely core cause of the financial meltdown. Warren Buffett was right when he said that they have the potential to be weapons of financial mass destruction. I believe, and I think many believe, that one of the signal achievements of Dodd-Frank...
I think he said credit default swaps. I don't think he said derivatives.
We can take a side bet on that, Mr. Chairman. I think he said derivatives. In any event, one of the signal achievements of Dodd-Frank was the imposition of a regulatory structure over these very large, very leveraged, potentially very dangerous instruments. The requirement that derivatives trade on clearinghouses, if possible to trade on exchanges, that trades will be reported to repositories, that the FSOC would have oversight over any systemic risks generated by derivatives. All of that is very good stuff. This bill, H.R. 3283, seeks to do something very narrow, which is to provide a, by the way, consistent with 722D of Dodd-Frank, which said that that Title VII would not have extraterritorial application unless it posed a commercial or systemic risk to our economy. So this is a bill consistent with 722D. I talked with Chairman Gensler about it today. He's got some fine concerns that we need to address before this comes to the floor. But this bill simply does this. It clarifies that there will not be double regulations, double margins for transactions that occur offshore the U.S. in Basel signatory countries. Basel, as I think everyone on the committee knows, is a regulatory and prudential structure of oversight for financial institutions. So the notion that this is creating, that H.R. 3283 is creating an unregulated environment for anybody or for any transaction is just flat out wrong. That said, I appreciate the intent of Mr. Miller's amendment. I think we should take a look about whether we want to put a floor level of margin into any transaction in which a U.S. Entity is involved. And I actually think it's an interesting idea that we should talk more about and perhaps think about moving to the floor. And I actually appreciate Congresswoman Waters' notation that there is inter-affiliate language in this bill that we should sync with what was passed on the floor last night. My amendment here, which is technical in nature but very important, deals with some inartful drafting in the original bill, specifically for those who are interested on page 2, lines 11 and 18, 19, and 20, can be read, in fact, can easily be read to set up an exemption from Title VII for not just extraterritorial deals happening offshore, but when you have a U.S. entity acting with a non-U.S. entity. That is not the intention of 722D. It's not the intention of this legislation. I worked with Chairman Garrett this morning and his staff to draft what is a technical amendment, which again would simply specify that the exemptions from Title VII are purely extraterritorial in nature. That is my amendment. And again, I think Chairman Garrett and I are in support of this. It is very important that this technical amendment pass because it's not the intention of this underlying legislation to create a Title VII exemption for a cross-border transaction. And with that, Mr. Chairman,
Could I ask a question? I understand the second part of the amendment. I'm trying to figure out why you would change the definition on page 2.
On page 2, this is opaque language, but on page 2, when you've read it about 12 times, you realize that line 11, which says that a swap that is entered into between a U.S. person on line 11 and a person who is on line 18, any other non-U.S. person, that sets up the possibility that a U.S. cross-border transaction, a U.S. entity working with, let's say, a German entity, would be exempt from Title VII. That's not the intent of this underlying legislation.
All right. Further comment?